The candle flame trembles like a solitary heartbeat, its glow fighting to hold the darkness at bay. Smoke curls upward in soft gray ribbons, clinging to the soot-black beams that sag above, carrying with it the faint odor of melted tallow and ash. Outside, frost spreads across the cottage window, pale and brittle, the icy veins tracing their way into the glass as though the night itself is trying to creep in. Inside, silence reigns. Only the faint scratching of quill on parchment dares disturb it, the tip dragging through rough fibers of vellum, ink blotting in pools that look like shadows solidified. The scholar bends over the page, shoulders wrapped in a threadbare cloak, its wool stiff with years of smoke and damp. His hand trembles, though not from cold alone. It is the hour between sleeps, the time when bodies stir though dawn has not yet arrived, the hour known to medieval minds as both sacred and uncanny. 4 hours of rest had carried him into a dream world of chanting monks and pale apparitions, but now wakefulness holds him as a captive. He does not light another candle. The single flame is enough. Shadows gather in the corners like silent witnesses. This strange rhythm of sleep and waking is no accident, no personal affliction. It is the cadence of medieval nights. They called the first rest the dead sleep, and the second the morning sleep. Between them stretched a quiet expanse, a space for prayers, for whispers, for secret acts. In villages across the land, men rose to tend their fires or sharpen their knives. Women stirred from straw beds to nurse children or kneel in hushed devotion, while monks and scholars bent to their manuscripts as the world outside remained in darkness. Sleep was not a single journey, but a broken pilgrimage, carved into 2 halves, each echoing with mystery. The scholar dips his quill again. The ink smells sharp, metallic, as though it too carries the taste of iron blood. He writes in Latin, words coiled with faith and reason, prayers braided with commentary. His eyes strain in the shifting candlelight, and behind them stir the remnants of dreams, a procession of pale faces, cloaked figures in shadow, bells tolling at an unseen hour. He shivers and presses the page flat, as though to steady his own heart. The silence is not empty. It is thick, heavy, watchful. In the medieval night, silence itself was a presence, as real as stone walls or the wood beneath his elbows. Time moves differently in this suspended hour. He listens for it, straining for the sound of the rooster or the drip of water from the eaves. But all he hears is the beating of his own heart, amplified in the hush, as though the body too becomes a cathedral. He wonders if the pause between sleeps is a glimpse into eternity, a brief exile from the common hours of men. In these moments, the soul feels nearer to the divine, and yet closer also to danger. For demons were said to walk in that darkness. The church warned of temptations born in sleepless nights. To rise from bed at such hours was to walk a narrow path between faith and perdition. He lifts his gaze to the shuttered window. Frosted panes catch the candle's glow, glimmering faintly like fragments of stars. Beyond lies the frozen village, huts crouched beneath snow, livestock huddled in stalls, the river stiff with ice. Somewhere out there, a mother rocks her child in drowsy silence. A peasant sharpens his blade for the morning's toil. A thief perhaps slips through alleys under cloak of dark. This hour belongs to all and none. It binds the village together, yet cloaks each in solitude. The scholar whispers a prayer, his voice barely audible above the crackle of cooling wood. His words tumble like broken leaves. Domine, salvum fac populum tuum. Lord, save your people. The Latin clings to his lips, dry as parchment. He feels guilt creep into his chest, guilt that his devotion is thin, that his mind drifts to worldly matters even in this hallowed pause. He remembers debts unpaid, letters unwritten, the faces of students long gone. Shadows bend across the room, his own stretching wide on the plaster wall like a phantom double. He stares into its hollow eyes and feels the weight of judgment. Yet there is also comfort in the ritual. To wake in darkness, to pray, to read, it is a rhythm as natural to him as breath. He reaches for a small wooden cross lying beside the manuscript, its surface smooth from years of touch. The grain smells faintly of smoke and pine, carrying the memory of forest and fire. He presses it to his lips and closes his eyes. In that moment, the silence seems to bless him, wrapping him like a cloak. But sleep tugs again, insistent. His eyelids grow heavy, the flame blurs into a halo. He feels himself slipping, as though the world is folding inward. He resists a moment longer, forcing the quill across the page, words trailing into slanted lines. At last, he lays it aside. His head bows, his breath deepens, and the candle flickers as if in farewell. He lies back upon the straw mattress, coarse and rustling beneath him, and pulls the cloak tighter. The cold seeps through regardless, a reminder that even in rest, life was never free of hardship. His eyes close, but he does not enter dream immediately. For a time, he lingers in that threshold, aware of the body's surrender, aware that he is stepping through a veil. He thinks of eternity, of judgment, of the fragile border between waking and dream. The rusted latch on the door glints faintly in the candle's last light, like a sentinel watching. Then darkness swallows it. The second sleep carries him away. And in the village beyond his walls, others too surrender. Peasants curling into straw, children murmuring half-dreams, monks silent in their cells. The night holds them all in its broken rhythm, half-waking, half-dreaming, poised between fear and faith. In this fragile cadence of rest and return, medieval life was bound together. It was a rhythm that held within it the seeds of survival and despair alike, shaping the soul as much as the body. What we call strange today was once the heartbeat of entire generations, echoing through centuries of cold nights and whispered prayers. The scholar breathes deeply, slipping further into oblivion. Outside, the frost thickens, the silence deepens. Yet within that silence, something endures, an ancient pattern, a haunting memory of nights divided, of hearts stirred awake when the world slept, of shadows thick with both fear and grace. And as the second sleep descends fully, the story does not end. For in every chamber, every cloister, every hut where men and women rose in the dark, new questions emerged. What did they see in that silence? What did they hear when the world paused between breaths? The answer waits, coiled in the darkness, ready to draw us deeper into the next chapter of the medieval night. The loom waits in the darkness, its wooden frame looming like the skeleton of a ship caught mid-voyage. Threads glisten faintly in the candle's dim glow, taut strands stretched across the beam as though they are veins of some living creature. The air smells of flax and smoke, a mingling of earth and fire that clings to her hands. She has risen from her bed of straw and wool, her body still heavy from the first sleep, her breath slow as she pads across the cold floor. The fire in the hearth has collapsed into embers, their red eyes blinking faintly. She pulls her cloak tighter and sits before the loom, listening to the silence, a silence that is not empty but filled with the faint shifting of beams, the sigh of wind pressing against shutters, the faraway bark of a dog in the village. She begins to weave, her fingers threading the shuttle through the warp, the sound sharp and small against the cavernous hush. The clack of wood is a rhythm older than words. Each strike feels like the pulse of a drum, the echo of a heart. In the strange hour between sleeps, her loom becomes confessional, altar, and battlefield all at once. Her mind drifts as her hands obey habit. She remembers her husband, taken by war's hunger, his absence stitched into every thread she pulls tight. She remembers the child buried the past winter, his small body wrapped in the very wool she spun. The threads under her fingers become not just fabric but memory itself, binding loss into cloth that will outlast even her grief. The candle flickers, shadows leap across the rafters, and the room seems alive. Her song rises, low and broken, an old lullaby that her mother once sang when winter gnawed at the bones of the house. The words are simple, but in them is exile, in them is survival. Her voice catches, and for a moment the shuttle halts in midair. She thinks of the holy men who rise in these same hours, kneeling before cold stone, whispering psalms into the dark. She thinks of farmers sharpening scythes before dawn, of thieves slipping through alleys while the village sleeps. This is the hour when the world reveals its hidden face, when truth shows itself in silence. Her fingertips are raw, the dye stains clinging like bruises. The thread cuts her skin, but she does not flinch. Pain, too, becomes part of the pattern. She leans into the loom, the wood pressing against her chest, the smell of flax swelling with each breath. In this vigil, she is no longer weaver alone. She is mourner, widow, guardian of memory, chronicler of grief. The tapestry before her begins to hold shapes that she does not command, shadows of a lost child's face, the outline of a soldier's helm, a bird poised in flight. She weaves them without thought, the dark between sleeps guiding her hand. When the second sleep approaches, it does not fall upon her suddenly. It creeps in like a tide, heavy and slow, filling her limbs with lead. The shuttle slips from her hand and rests on the loom's frame, as if it too is weary. Her eyes close, though she does not wish them to, the threads blurring into river lines. She lowers her head, and the tapestry stands unfinished, shimmering faintly in the dim candlelight. It is both cloth and confession, wound tight with sorrow and hope. She drifts into slumber again, cloak pulled around her shoulders, breath shallow and even. The loom towers above her like a sentinel, its threads humming softly in the cold air. Outside, the village stirs faintly toward dawn, smoke curling from chimneys, roosters muttering in coops. Yet here she sleeps, suspended between grief and grace, her half-finished work waiting for her waking hand. The second sleep carries her into dreams woven from the very cloth she has begun, and the night holds her, as it holds all souls who stir and labor in the haunted pause between sleeps. The torch sputters in the turret, its flame snapping against the draft that seeps through the arrow slits. Stone sweats with cold, beads of damp sliding down into the grooves cut by masons long dead. The knight awakens from his first sleep, breath clouding in the frigid air, heart still pounding with the remnants of dreams, battle cries swallowed by mist, the clatter of hooves, the sudden silence of comrades struck down. His hand finds the sword at his side. The leather-wrapped hilt slick with the residue of oil. Metal groans softly as he lifts it, testing its weight as though to remind himself that it remains real, that he remains bound to duty. The chamber reeks of tallow smoke and rust. Shadows hang heavy in the corners, swelling with each gust of wind. He adjusts the chainmail shirt clinging damp against his skin, its iron links biting cold. The silence presses close, broken only by the faint scuttle of a rat in the straw or the mournful creak of timbers settling. This is the hour between sleeps, the space when men rise though dawn is far, when the body refuses to surrender fully to oblivion. The knight stands within it like a figure carved in stone, his thoughts as restless as his blade. Guilt gnaws at him in this suspended dark. He thinks of the vow he swore before altar and Lord, his palm pressed to relics, his lips sealing faith with words. He remembers the look in his mother's eyes when he left for war, a mixture of pride and fear she never voiced. He remembers, too, the comrade who fell beside him in last summer's skirmish, eyes wide and vacant, even as the dust still swirled. The knight wonders why he alone breathes in this chamber, why the dead crowd his dreams while he continues to rise from them. The sword in his hand becomes both anchor and accusation. The night is alive with echoes. Far below, the courtyard's well creaks as a rope strains against wind. A banner droops along the wall, its colors muted in darkness, its edges frayed like wounds left unstitched. He stares at it, recalling battles where it once streamed proud above him, and he feels the weight of loyalty press upon his chest. His vigil in the feels less like choice and more like penance. The candle burns lower, dripping wax that hardens like frozen tears upon the sill. He grips the sword tighter, the metal biting into his palm until it seems his very flesh is fused with steel. When exhaustion presses upon him again, he does not yield at once. He leans against the cold wall, staring into the dark until his eyes blur. His thoughts run like water down stone, uncontainable, seeking every crack. He whispers a prayer, though no lips answer him, only the hollow gust of wind winding through the tower. His voice fades, and with it his strength. He lowers himself onto the straw, sword clutched against his chest as though it were shield and cross alike. Sleep returns not as comfort, but as surrender, a slow descent into shadows he cannot resist. He dreams of banners raised, of comrades beside him, of dawn breaking over fields slick with dew and blood. The torch gutters, flame shrinking into a glowing coal, casting his armor in dull red. In that dim glow, he drifts into his second slumber, the weight of iron across his body and the greater weight of vows upon his soul. Outside, the fortress holds its silence. Guards pace the ramparts, their breaths pluming white against the stars. Far beyond, villages sleep in huts of straw and timber, peasants curled against winter's bite. Yet within this turret chamber, a knight dreams, suspended between loyalty and regret, his vigil swallowed by darkness, and as he slips deeper, the question lingers, what will dawn demand of him when the bells call him to rise again? The bell tolls once, low and mournful, its vibrations spilling through the cloistered stone like water seeping into cracks. The nun stirs from her straw mattress, the woolen blanket clinging with the odor of smoke and damp. Her body aches from hours of kneeling, yet habit drives her forward. She rises into the stillness of the convent, veil brushing against her cheeks, bare feet whispering across cold flagstones. The air is dense with the scent of old incense, sweet yet suffocating, clinging to every corner of the chapel like a ghost that refuses to depart. The night is not yet over. It is the time between sleeps, the hour when the body wakes, though dawn remains far. She has known it all her life, as did her sisters before her, this fractured rhythm of rest and vigil. The first sleep carried her into dreams of saints, their faces stern and radiant, their voices mingling with the chanting of unseen choirs. But now wakefulness claims her, pulling her into the dim chamber where silence reigns like a sovereign. She kneels, pressing her palms to cold stone, the chill biting into her skin until it feels as though the stone is consuming her warmth, claiming her body for itself. Her lips shape words in Latin, psalms carried like embers in the hollow of her chest. Miserere me, Deus. Have mercy on me, O God. The sound barely rises above the soft hiss of wax as a candle droops into its own molten pool. Her voice trembles, not from fear of the darkness, but from fear of herself. Fear of doubt, of distraction, of the sin that whispers in the silence. She remembers the laughter of childhood before the convent walls claimed her, the feel of sunlight across her skin when fields of rye rippled golden. She remembers the moment she turned away from the world, vowing her life to one unseen. These memories weigh upon her now like stones in the folds of her habit. The chapel listens. Shadows stretch long across the vaulted arches, bending toward her like watchful guardians. The painted saints gaze from their panels, eyes both merciful and unyielding. She feels the weight of centuries pressing down on her small frame, her whispered prayers joining a chorus that began long before she was born. She thinks of sisters awake in other cloisters, rising in the same hour, their voices echoing across Europe's scattered convents. Though divided by distance, they are bound in rhythm, as if one great unseen loom were weaving their voices into a single tapestry of devotion. Yet devotion does not banish loneliness. The vigil hour is sharp with exile. She feels it in the hollow of her chest, in the silence that follows each whispered line of prayer. Faith is a tether, strong and unyielding, but solitude frays the edges of her soul. She presses her forehead to the cold brass of the lectern, its surface worn smooth by countless hands before hers. The smell of ink and vellum drifts upward from a half-finished manuscript, saints etched in colors that glimmer faintly even in the dim candlelight. She traces one with her fingertip, the pigment dry but alive, and in that touch she feels the devotion of unknown brothers who bent over these same lines by their own flickering flames. Her eyes grow heavy. The silence deepens, wrapping itself around her like a shroud. She surrenders her vigil, lowering herself onto the bench, her breath steady, veil slipping slightly as her head bows. The candle gutters once, casting long, wavering shadows across the floor, then steadies. The chapel remains awake, though she drifts once more toward the second sleep. As her body yields, her lips still shape the final words of her prayer, carrying her into dream, as though across a narrow bridge. The night enfolds her gently now, less as judgment, more as mercy. And beyond the convent walls, the world continues in its own fractured rhythm. Peasants stirring in barns, soldiers whispering vows to swords, widows bending to looms. All rise and fall in the haunted silence between sleeps. When the second slumber finally claims her, the chapel keeps its vigil in her stead. Shadows lean closer, bells hold their tongues, and silence spreads like a veil across the cloister. And in that veil, the story does not end. For dawn waits, and with it the call of labor, prayer, and sacrifice. The question lingers, coiled in the dark. When morning comes, what will remain of the prayers whispered in the fragile pause of night? The mill groans in the darkness, its wooden bones sighing as the river presses against the wheel. The air is thick with damp flour, fine dust hanging like pale smoke, catching in the nose and throat until every breath tastes of bread, yet unborn. The miller wakes from his first sleep with the weight of toil already heavy on his chest. The straw bed creaks beneath him, the woolen blanket clinging with the sour scent of sweat and grain. He rises slowly, rubbing his hands raw against his coarse tunic, listening to the river's eternal song outside the walls. The fire has long since collapsed into gray ash. The cold of the chamber is sharp, biting through the cracks in the shutters, gnawing at his bones as if it too demands its portion of labor. He stumbles toward the millstone, laying his palm on its rough surface. The stone is cold and gritty, a slab that has consumed generations, grinding not only wheat, but men's bodies down to dust. He breathes in deeply. The smell of ground grain mingles with mold and river water, the perfume of a life shackled to work. This is the hour between sleeps. In noble halls, it is a time for prayer, for reading, for reflection. But here, in the heart of toil, it is the hour of reckoning. He thinks of debts owed to the Lord whose grain he mills, debts that deepen with every harvest too thin, every season too cruel. He thinks of his children curled on pallets in the loft, their bellies never quite full. He thinks of his wife, her hands rough from kneading dough, her back bent from carrying baskets. Hunger shadows every memory, pressing itself into his chest as relentless as the turning wheel. He takes up the wooden paddle, leaning his weight into it until the wheel groans again. The sound is both burden and blessing, for the wheel's turn means survival, yet also unending bondage. Dust clings to his hair, coating his beard until he feels like a specter of his own labor. He whispers to himself, though the words are more exhalations than speech. Tomorrow will come. The river will turn. The bread will rise. His voice trembles in the empty mill, swallowed by the grind of stone against stone. The candle flickers on the ledge, its light casting warped shadows across the walls. One shadow looks like a noose, swaying slightly with the draft. Another resembles a cross, stark and unmoving. He stares at them until his eyes burn. Is he condemned? Or saved? The symbols blur as fatigue steals back over him. He leans against the beam, rope fibers rough beneath his palm, grounding him in the moment, in the burden of the mill. Sleep calls again. Not gently, but with the weight of collapse. His limbs surrender, and he sinks to the straw piled near the wheel. Flour dust swirls above him, drifting like pale spirits in the candlelight. The second sleep seizes him, pulling him down into darkness, threaded with dreams of bread that never rises, of debts that never end, of rivers that never stop. Yet even in this descent, there is a strange peace. The wheel turns without him, grinding on into the night, carrying his work into dream. The river sings its endless hymn, and the mill itself becomes both confessor and jailer. In that fragile cadence of waking and rest, of labor and surrender, the miller's life continues, half in shadow, half in toil, entirely bound to the turning of stone and stream. And as he drifts deeper, the night itself seems to whisper of the world beyond his mill, of soldiers who march in darkness, of nuns who kneel in prayer, of peasants who whisper secrets into the fire. All souls bound by the same broken rhythm of sleep, all tethered to shadows that wait between breaths. What dawn will bring, he cannot know. But the wheel turns, and the river runs, and his dreams are filled with dust and bread. The frost on the stone sill gleams like shards of glass, brittle and pale, as the exiled prince presses his palm against the window's narrow slit. Outside, the night exhales a hollow wind, carrying with it the faint tang of smoke from fires far below. He pulls his fur-lined cloak tighter, though the cold has already entered his bones, gnawing with a cruelty sharper than any blade. From sleep he has risen too soon, not with the calm of rest, but with the weight of memory dragging him awake. His first slumber had been restless, visions of banners torn, of trumpets calling him to a throne now lost, of his father's hall echoing with laughter he will never hear again. On the ledge rests a rusted key, no larger than a man's thumb, its teeth corroded, its promise hollow. He turns it over in his hand, its edges rough against his skin, the metal biting as though it resents his touch. This key once opened the chest that held his inheritance, scrolls of law, seals of command, the symbols of rule passed down through generations. Now it is nothing but a relic, an emblem of a claim stripped from him. He clutches it tighter, whispering to himself that it still belongs to him, though stone walls and iron locks say otherwise. The chamber smells of damp and despair. The straw mattress behind him reeks of mildew, its fibers brittle as old parchment. The torch in the corridor beyond crackles faintly, its light leaking beneath the door, a reminder that guards stand near, listening, waiting. He feels their presence like chains across his chest. His lips part with a prayer, though the words falter. Saints, do you hear me still? Or am I already forgotten? The silence that answers is heavier than the stone pressing down on him. He remembers the feasts of his youth, the tables laden with venison roasted on spits, loaves steaming with spice, goblets brimming with mead. He recalls the murmur of Latin law pronounced by clerks, the solemn nod of advisors, the glimmer of banners in golden halls. Each memory is salt against the wound of his exile, each detail a cruelty that mocks his barren present. He runs his thumb along the rusted grooves of the key and imagines unlocking not a chest, but a door, one that would return him to light, to inheritance, to the Father's voice that now comes to him only in dreams. The wind moans through the slit window, carrying with it the echo of bells from a distant monastery. Their tolling seeps into his marrow, a reminder that the world beyond these walls continues its rhythm, indifferent to his grief. He envies the monks their certainty, their ordered prayers between sleeps, their faith steady as stone. His own faith frays in the silence, his prayers caught in his throat like thorns. The cold seeps deeper, and he shivers, clutching the key as though it alone anchors him to the man he once was. Fatigue presses again, not gentle but relentless. His eyelids sag, his head bows, and he lies upon the earthen floor, cloak spread around him like a shroud. The key rests against his chest, its weight small but searing. As the second sleep drags him under, he dreams of doors flung open, of courts filled with light, of a crown lowered onto his brow. Yet even in dream, the rust stains his hands, and the shadows of exile coil about him. The chamber falls silent once more, save for the soft hiss of the torch outside. The frost thickens on the sill, spreading like veins across the stone. The exiled prince breathes deeply, lost to the second sleep, bound to the rusted key and the dreams it awakens. Beyond his walls, dawn creeps unseen, waiting to summon him back into chains and silence. And so the night holds him, as it holds all who wake in the haunted hour, caught between memory and surrender, between despair and the faint, flickering hope of return. The wind presses hard against the shutters, rattling them in their frames as though the night itself demands entry. Inside the hall, the fire has died to embers, a dull red glow casting long, skeletal shadows across the beams. The exiled prince does not stir, for this story belongs not to him alone, but to the countless souls who shared this fractured rhythm of sleep. In village huts and castle keeps, in monasteries and guard towers, the same strange hour unfolds, a silence heavy with breath, with whispers, with fears that only surface when the world is broken in two. A peasant rises from his bed of straw, the smell of damp wool and smoke clinging to his skin. His stomach growls with the ache of hunger, and he stumbles to stir the fire, coaxing reluctant sparks with fingers stiff from toil. For him, the pause between sleeps is survival. Time to mend a tool, to check the tethered livestock, to pray for bread enough to outlast the winter. In the cloister, a nun kneels with cracked lips moving in whispered psalms, her faith strong but her heart gnawed by loneliness. In the turret, a knight grips his sword in the dark, haunted by vows and blood. Across the land, the hour stitches their lives together, unseen yet shared, a tapestry woven in shadow. The air in these moments is never empty. It is filled with the smell of smoke, of sweat, of tallow, of earth. It is filled with the sound of whispering prayers, of creaking beams, of rats rustling through grain sacks. It is filled with dread, the belief that demons walk most freely when sleep is fractured, that the soul is most vulnerable when the body stirs between rest. Mothers cradle children against the chill, farmers sharpen their scythes though dawn is far, and thieves slip through alleys under cloak of dark. Each one, in their own way, bends to the hour's demand. There is something sacred in this rhythm, though it is born of hardship. To wake in the dark is to face oneself without distraction, to reckon with hunger, with loss, with guilt. Yet it is also a gift, a space for prayer, for weaving, for thought. In that fragile span, medieval men and women found both burden and grace, exile and belonging. Their nights were not seamless journeys into dream, but broken pilgrimages, carrying them through shadow toward the faint promise of dawn. As the embers fade lower, the world yields once more to slumber. The peasant curls back into straw, the nun lowers her head onto the wooden pew, the knight sinks into armor-heavy rest. The second sleep takes them all, a tide swallowing their fears and hopes alike. And beyond, the village lies hushed, its rhythm shared, its breath bound together in the fractured cadence of medieval night. But dawn waits. It waits with its demands of labor and prayer, with its reckonings of hunger and war, with its tolling bells and cold winds. The second sleep will break, as it always does, into the harsh light of morning. And the question lingers in the silence. What truths were spoken? What fears awakened in that strange, haunted hour that belonged to neither night nor day?